What's up guys, Justin Greenwald here, welcome to 65 Drums. Today I'm answering one of the most common questions I get on my channel, pad compatibility. So people ask me, do my Roland pads work with Alesis modules? Will my Yamaha pads work with Roland modules? Will Pintech pads work with Roland modules? You know, the level of complexity around this thing is huge because there are so many brands, so many different pads, so many different drum modules. Roland alone has made well over a dozen different drum modules and tons of drum pads. And for the most part, if you buy a Roland pad and a Roland module, 99% of the time they work together. The most safe thing is just to use pads and modules made by one brand. So just buy pads and modules made from Yamaha, or buy pads and modules made by Roland, pads and modules made by Alesis. That is the most safe thing because 99% of the time they will work together. But I'm going to make this video about different combinations with other brands. And I'm going to make a lot of different blanket statements in this video, and obviously not all of them will be true for every single drum module and every single drum pad. Okay, so just be sure to double check any pad before you buy it. Go check out forums. vdrums.com is the best one if you want to check out specific answers to specific pad and module combinations. This video is more like a guide to sort of give you a general overview of what generally works and what doesn't, okay? First off, ride cymbals and hi-hats. Stick with the brand that made your drum module because the way different companies make rides and hi-hats are different from each other. For example, Yamaha places the piezos and switches differently than Roland does. For example, you need two cables to connect a Roland ride cymbal to the drum module. Yamaha only uses one. They both have 3 zones. So obviously you're going to lose a zone whenever you use like a Yamaha ride cymbal with a Roland module, or vice versa. And also with hi-hats, they aren't even compatible with each other at all. The only time to buy a ride cymbal or a hi-hat from a brand other than the one that made your drum set is if you're buying like a Pintech or Heart Dynamics like ride cymbal or hi-hat. They were made to specifically work with Roland drum modules. So that will work. And I'll talk more about third-party manufacturers later on in the video. For the first part of the video, I'm just going to stick to Roland, Yamaha, and Alesis because they make like 90% of drum sets sold that are electronic. One other guideline is that if you're using a low-end drum module that doesn't let you switch different trigger settings and sensitivity and stuff like that, don't buy pads from other manufacturers because you can't change any of the trigger settings. That module is a very, very dumbed down drum module. So don't go buy a Yamaha drum pad because you can't sort of force it to work by changing stuff in the drum module. One last thing, this video is not about modifications. Like if a cymbal is losing a zone or something, you can like buy a new piezo and rewire it and, I don't know, reverse polarity and stuff to make it work with your drum module. I'm not going to talk about all that. That is way too complicated and I don't really get into that stuff. There are a lot of other people that know way more about that than me. Go check out the Edrum forums if you want to learn how to rewire a cymbal and mod it to work with your specific drum module. Okay, so let's start with the Yamaha pads. Yamaha pads are the least cross-compatible of any drum manufacturer. It's just due to the way they wire their drum pads. For example, their silicone pads have the setup of piezo, switch, switch. So you'll have a piezo for the drum head and then 2 switches for the 2 rim zones. If you want to learn what switches and piezos are, I'll leave a link in the description below where I talk all about what they do and what they are. Piezos and switches are just the inner workings of every drum pad you've ever played. And depending on how they're wired, they make it so it'll work with this module and not that module. So the way Yamaha wires their stuff is the reason why they don't work that well with other drum brands. And like I said earlier, Yamaha hi-hats only work with Yamaha drum modules, so don't try to use other different brands for that. Also, some of their cymbals will lose a zone, specifically the ride cymbals. And sometimes even a crash cymbal, you'll have like the edge and the bow like switch zones if you're using a different drum brand. I don't really recommend using Yamaha pads with other drum manufacturers. I think you can get their drum pads like the tom, snare, that type of thing to work, but sometimes the rim will be a little iffy, so it's just safer to stick with Yamaha modules and Yamaha pads if you like the way they feel. Okay, so let's move on to Roland pads. Since Roland was the king of the Edrum industry for a long time, and I think they still do make the best stuff, a lot of different little companies have built up to make third-party pads that work with Roland drum modules. So you have a lot of flexibility if you do have a Roland drum module. PinTech pads work with Roland drum modules, DrumTech, Jacoby, Field, a lot of different independent builders, the guys that do acoustic to electronic conversions where they'll take acoustic drum shells and put mesh heads on them and then sell it to you. Those pretty much all of those work with Roland drum modules. Roland is kind of like the standard, the way they set up their piezos. So Roland uses piezo for their drum pads. So a piezo for the rim and a piezo for the drum head. The way Roland triggers their rubber pads is piezo switch. So I believe piezo for the drum head, switch for the rim. And yes, Roland pads do work pretty well with Alesis modules. Not every single pad made by Roland will work with an Alesis module, but if you use any Roland kick, toms, snare, pretty much all of those will work with Alesis drum modules. If you want to see a really cool compatibility guide Alesis made for their DM10 module, I'll leave a link in the description below to that PDF. Basically, Alesis just lines up all kinds of different pads made by different manufacturers, Roland, Yamaha, Trap, 2Box, PinTech, and basically they just have a yes/no down the list. Will it work with the Roland CY14? Yes or no. Will it work with the PDX100? Yes, no. And then it will tell you what gain settings to put the Alesis module on to accept those different pads. So go check out that compatibility guide, especially if you have an Alesis DM10 module. So yes, Alesis modules generally work with Roland tom, snare, and kick pads because they have the same trigger setup. Okay, so let's move over to Alesis drum pads. Alesis kick, snare, tom pads will work with Roland drum modules. Maybe not as well as Roland pads, but they generally do work. And also, if you didn't know, a lot of Alesis tom and snare pads are actually made by Medeli. And again, with the Alesis ride cymbal, it won't work perfectly with Roland drum modules. You'll lose a zone. The best way to tell if a ride cymbal will work with a Roland drum module is to just look at how many trigger inputs are on the back of the ride cymbal. Roland ride cymbals require 2 trigger inputs. So if you have like an Alesis or a Yamaha ride cymbal and only 1 cable comes from the ride cymbal, you know it's going to be missing a zone when you plug it into the back of the drum module of a Roland. Alright, so I added this section. Let's talk about 2-box. 2-box pads work with Roland and Alesis drum modules because they're using piezo for the toms and the snare. So that means it will work with Roland modules and Alesis modules. Again, the cymbals seem to be the problem. If you plug in a 2-box ride cymbal into a Roland module, you're gonna have problems because the way 2-box wires their cymbal is they don't have a switch for the bell zone because Roland has switch, piezo, switch for their ride cymbal. So a switch for the edge, a piezo in the middle of the cymbal, and then another switch near the bell. And 2-box doesn't do it like that. They actually have their piezo near the bell. So it's actually, they interpret whether or not you're hitting the bell by how hard you're hitting. So if you're hitting the bell, there's going to be a lot of force going to that piezo right next to it. So they'll assume you hit the bell. But you can also accidentally trigger the bell sound by hitting the bow area too hard because again it thinks that you hit the bell. And I'm talking about the 2-box module. This happens, not a Roland module. This happens even when you've plugged the right pad into a 2-box module. If you hit the bow area too hard, it can trigger the bell area. So I want to leave you with a couple of different things to think about before buying a pad from a different manufacturer. First off, if you're buying a single zone pad, just like a bar trigger or maybe like a kick drum pad, most of the time it will work with almost any brand. You'll just have to adjust some trigger setting. Another thing I recommend is not giving up on a pad if it doesn't trigger properly the first time you plug it in. So for example, if you bought like an Alesis pad and you're using it with your Roland module, you can probably make it work by cycling through different trigger options within your Roland module. So when you go through trigger types, you can tell the drum module that you have a VH11 plugged in, the KD120, a PDX100. You can tell the drum module that you're plugging in those different kinds of pads. And when you cycle through those different pad types, you might find the one that most resembles the pad that you plugged in from a different manufacturer. Because when you're cycling through all of those different pads, your module is thinking to itself, oh, this pad is switch piezo switch, or oh, this pad is piezo switch, oh, this pad is piezo piezo. So you have to find the right combination through all of those different pad types. And then of course you can adjust your sensitivity and all of that good stuff to make it really trigger well. Also, there are a couple of different drum modules that are made to work with any pad. So there's only two so far. You've got the Pearl Mimic that isn't out yet. It'll be out in 2017 sometime. And it's made to work with Roland and Alesis and Yamaha. And then you've got the ATV 85 drum module. I did a review on this drum module. ATV was kind enough to send me one to do a review. It's not the greatest drum module of all time. I actually don't think it's ready yet. I need them to do a couple of different updates to the firmware to add more features and stuff. But some of the sounds in that drum module are very, very good. And if you want to use Yamaha and Roland pads perfectly at the same time without having two different drum modules running into each other, then buying an ATV 85 at this time, the making of this video, that's your best option. Also, what some drummers do is they'll use just multiple different drum modules. So for example, if they really like Yamaha, like kick, snare, and toms, they'll buy like a Yamaha drum module, but at the same time, maybe they like Roland cymbals, so they'll buy a Roland module. What they do is they'll take the Yamaha drum module, and then from the master out of that Yamaha module, they'll plug it into the mix input of their Roland module, so you can hear both sounds at the same time. Honestly, that is the safest way to go. So what you do is you have your Roland drum module and your Yamaha drum module. The Roland pads are plugged into the Roland module. The Yamaha pads are plugged into the Yamaha module. You plug them both into, like, I don't know, a little mini mixer, and that way you know for sure they'll both work. I think that's the best way. One last thing I didn't mention, the little tuning knob on some of the Yamaha silicone DTX pads will only work with Yamaha modules. The great thing about those Yamaha pads is that you can tune the drums in real time without using the drum module. You just have this little tuning knob, and that feature only works on Yamaha modules. One last thing, again, please go search specific pad combinations on Google before you buy them. If you have a Roland module and you want to use it with a specific Alesis pad, do a Google search and try to make sure it works before you buy it, okay? I'm just giving you general information. I can't guarantee every single thing I said in this video was true. I don't know everything about E-drums. I just wanted to give you like a general guide so you have an idea of what might work with what different manufacturer, all right? Also, a great forum to go check out is V-Drums. Alesis has a forum or two dedicated to it. 2Box has a great forum. They know a ton of information. They know, the people on those forums know way more than I do. So go check out those different websites for more information on this stuff. Thank you so much for watching. I make a new video about electronic drums 2 to 3 times a week. If you want to keep on top of those, subscribe and press the little bell icon next to that. Also, I've got a back catalog of like over 100 videos on E-drums if you want to go check those out. All right, see you guys in a few.